What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Friday, May 4th, 2018. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Or Pauhana Friday, as we say locally. Tomorrow is Cinco de Mayo. So we're going to get the cervezas out there and have a little bit of a party there. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. It's been a very, very busy news day. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. A reminder that the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 with her unique perspective on the world. And before we get into the news, a little bit of an announcement. As you know, we've been talking about this promotion with the Front Sight Firearm Trading Academy, where for a one-time donation of $500 to RBN, you will get a lifetime commander's membership at Front Sight. A lot of benefits to it. Apparently, this promotion has been very, very popular, and Front Sight and RBN have just announced the promotion does not end tomorrow, like the commercial has been saying. It has now been extended to June 2nd, so that is really, really good news for those of you who were thinking about excuse me, a lot of dust in the air. Had a little sneeze there. For those of you who are thinking about getting into the to this promotion, you now have a little more time to save up your pennies and nickels and dimes and get in on the action. So that's a little bit of good news for all you Second Amendment enthusiasts. And rather, I think, symbolic that this announcement comes out on the same day that Trump is addressing the National Rifle Association convention. And he's out there saying all the right things. He believes in the Second Amendment, making America great. But we'll see what happens. More about the gun issue a little bit later in the show. But I'd like to start with what is kind of local news, but it has already gone international. As you know, yesterday we had a pretty large eruption of Hawaii's Kilauea volcano, actually originating at what's called the Pu'u'o'o crater. And some of the lava got into residential areas of Leilani estates, and there were lava fountains 150 feet in the air. 10,000 people have been ordered to evacuate. Now, the good news is that eruption has subsided, but nobody is willing to say that that's going to be the end of it. I was overlooking at the tilt meter data at the Hawaii Volcano Observatory, and the deformations are still increasing, and that's really a kind of a bad sign. We're also, possibly going to get some more large earthquakes, but for the moment, it looks like this eruption is over. What seems to be happening is the craters higher up on Kilauea are draining of lava. And from the quake pattern and the release near Leilani Estates, it looks like that whole mass of molten lava is traveling down the side of the mountain underneath the ground and looking for places to pop on through. So I don't think this is over yet until it basically reaches the sea. But that's where we are on that, and it has gone international. Now, I got a lot of emails from people who read Hawaii volcano, and they were concerned. And as I mentioned yesterday, Claire and I live on the island of Oahu. When they're talking about the Hawaii volcano, they're talking about the island of Hawaii, not the entire state. And I know it's a source of confusion, which is why locally we don't refer to the island of Hawaii as Hawaii. We call it simply the Big Island, because it is. It's a very big island, very beautiful island as well. They've closed off that area because inevitably when you have a major eruption, there are people who want to get on in there and get selfies with it, and that is a really, really bad thing to do. And I know it's a national park, but it is still an active volcano, as yesterday's eruption showed. And it is and can be very, very dangerous. So anyway, apparently we already have a phone call, so let's start with Mike in Chicago. Mike, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I figured I'd give you a call now, and you could talk. You're probably going to talk about this a little bit later on in your show. Anyway, the unemployment report was very positive. It came out today. One thing I'd like to again mention is the participation is either 62 or 63%. Keep that in mind. the U.S. population is, I believe, 230 million people, and I'm not that great with numbers, but help me out, if I make a mistake. But also, I believe there's 323 million people in America. 23 million people are undocumented.
Yes.
Okay, you can look that up. Okay, so you got a participation. Okay, now these undocumented workers, I mean, are they included in this participation, in this unemployment statistic?
I rather doubt it, because they can't be acknowledged by the businesses that employ them.
Exactly. So, okay, well, you see, there's always, Wall Street's always going to rally, and start pouring cheap money and buying back their own stock, all that garbage. But again, let me just think about one other thing. The overtime. There's been a really huge increase in overtime. Okay, again, we're looking at this unemployment number, and I have a hard time with it too. I mean, look at it; it's so broad-based, the industries and again, and all these other variables. But there's been a huge increase in overtime. And here's another thing: wages. There's no wage inflation. Okay, we're at all-time lows in unemployment number, but yet there's no wage inflation. Wages are I'm not going to say they're stagnant, but you're not seeing increase in wages.
Well,
right?
basically what you're saying is this
of
report doesn't make sense. It's typical government doublespeak, and you're absolutely right. Now, obviously, there are sectors of the population that can't work, the elderly, the very young. But if you look at that labor force participation rate, you find that somewhere in there's about 90 million Americans who want jobs, who have not been able to find jobs for months, if not years. And they're simply not included in these calculations. It's just a way of cooking the books. You're absolutely right. If there was this much of a shortage of labor, wages and salaries would be going up. And one of the things that allowing the illegals to flood into this country has done is to allow businesses to keep wages and salaries low.
That's correct, exactly. And I would like to bring up Los Angeles, California, as being a welfare state, and the homeless problem over there. Is it associated with this welfare state? Enforcing corporations and companies to Texas. Everybody's fleeing California, right?
Yes.
And also, do these undocumented workers, are they able to vote? They shouldn't be voting if they are. And I don't think they're going to vote Republican unless the Republicans, water down their logic.
The Democratic leadership. The Democratic leadership has already come out and said they literally rely on the illegal immigrant vote to hang on to power. And it's all illegal, and I don't understand why Trump isn't doing something about it. Now, thank goodness we had that court ruling in Texas that said, yes, they can have a voter ID law, because something has to be done about our very crooked election system. We had our faces rubbed in it in 2016. Hillary and the DNC stole the primary away from Bernie Sanders. They tried to steal the White House away from Donald Trump. It's an out-of-control mess. You've got people like Nancy Pelosi saying that they don't see anything wrong with rigging the primaries. Well, how do you call yourself the Democratic Party if you don't believe in the democratic process?
Yeah, and with this welfare state, I mean, just talking to you right now, we're looking at this. I mean, I would almost want to associate that with the homeless problem, and the crime rate is increasing. If you look at those statistics in California, crime is increasing. And then when I looked at this homeless problem, and these drug addicts are just laying on the side of they're defecating on themselves. I mean, wow! I mean, this stuff just blows you away.
It's real third world. It's real third world. California is not the beautiful state that Claire and I lived in and got married in anymore. And when we talk about moving back to the mainland, California is definitely off the list. We don't want to go back there. We want to go somewhere in the Midwest.
Yeah.
Anyway, Mike, got to let you go. I got a lot of news I got to cover today, so thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go. We're
I
going to
love your show, and have a great weekend, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And getting back into the news, polls are showing that support for continuing the Iran deal among the American people has reached its highest point. And apparently the numbers are 56% of the American people polled in the Morning Consult Political Survey backed the continuance of the nuclear deal. 26% opposed it. Everybody else was undecided. So for Trump to unilaterally pull out of the Iran deal, he's going against the will of the people, including the people who voted him into office. Now, one of the problems we're dealing with, of course, is that Mike Pompeo is a real hawk on Iran, and he's going to reinforce Trump's worst instincts when it comes to dealing with Iran. And Trump has just surrounded himself with really, really bad advisors. And unfortunately, I think the problem that is emerging now is that Trump is actually very easy to manipulate. I think he's seeking too much approval from the Washington insiders, and they're using it against him to steer him on the course they want to deal with. Now, over in Syria, as you know, Israel had issued a warning for Russia to stand down supporting Syria or they would be attacked. Russia, of course, came back and said, "Are you kidding?" And so Israel's now trying a different approach. They're reminding Russia that Israel did not join the Western sanctions against Russia. And now they're saying, you should be grateful and repay us with a more pro-Israel approach to Syria and Iran. So he's trying a charm offensive. He's trying a little bit of softness in negotiation. I don't think that's going to work either. Now, European diplomats are saying that they think that Netanyahu choreographed his Iran dog and pony show with the United States. That he didn't just come up with it himself, that it was done in concert with the U.S. government. And given how quickly Trump came on out and used it to claim that he was 100% right about Iran, it seems to make sense. We know that Netanyahu has family connections with Trump. We know that a lot of Trump's advisors routinely communicate with Israeli representatives. I think the surprise would be if there hadn't been coordination between Israel and the U.S. on this dog and pony show. Now, getting on over into Syria, the British Ministry of Defense has revealed, seemingly by accident, that British drones are firing what are called thermobaric weapons in Syria. And the disclosure came as a Freedom of Information response to drone wars detailing the use of Reaper drones over the previous 3 months. And in response, the Ministry of Defense gave a breakdown of the type of Hellfire missiles fired, stating that 19 AGM-114N4 and 44 AGM-114R2 had been used. Now, the N version of the missile uses what's called a metal-augmented charge warhead that contains a thermobaric explosive fill. This creates a huge shock wave, which then collapses back on itself, creating a huge vacuum, and basically destroys the internal organs of anybody in the vicinity. So it's a very, very nasty weapon. When you see a fireworks show, and you're seeing all the pretty fireworks go up, every once in a while there'll be this one firework, its technical name is a report, and it's just a single white dot, but it makes the biggest bang of all. That's basically an aluminum-based explosive, and that is very similar to what they're using in these thermobaric bombs. Now, apparently, the U.S. government does not like failure, and the white helmets clearly failed to create a believable case for a chemical weapons attack in Duma, and as a result, the U.S. is now freezing funding for the group because their credibility has crumbled after this latest false flag, and more exposures that they're actually working in league with the various terrorist groups. They try to present themselves as impartial, they're just there to help the people of Syria, but more and more it's obvious they're definitely on the anti-Assad side. Things are escalating over in Yemen. According to Middle East Monitor, U.S. forces are now deployed to assist the Saudis in Yemen. And they're sending in these Green Beret soldiers to basically help destroy Houthi training camps and missiles to avert the risk of attack within Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia got really kind of tired of rockets flying in from Yemen, which is something you should expect when you invade another person's countries. And the U.S. now has boots on the ground in Yemen on the side of Saudi Arabia against the people of Yemen. Things are also heating up in Ukraine. We saw this coming. There were warnings a week and a half ago. The Donbass has been shelled 27 times over the last day. And this is obviously a violation of the ceasefire regime. Basically, the new Easter truce came into force in the Donbass on March 30th, but the parties to the conflict keep accusing each other of shelling. So that ceasefire is falling apart. Now, Russia is calling for EU nations not to become accomplices in Ukrainian war crimes. They're saying, please stop supporting Ukraine's nationalist, inhumane, and criminal operations against the Donbass republics. And of course, they're mentioning the ceasefire violations. Now, despite the Russia bashing and Trump-Russia collusion and all the other nonsense, Trump has all of a sudden been talking soft about Russia. And he says he still wants to meet Putin. He wants to ease tensions between Russia and the U.S. and maybe limit the arms race, which is costing both countries huge, huge amounts of money. And Russia is saying, that's fine. We're perfectly open to that. Sergei Lavrov was being interviewed on Italy's Panorama magazine and said that Russia welcomes Donald Trump's desire to engage with Moscow. But then, the appropriate caution, the U.S. leader's deeds must match his words. And so far, we haven't gotten a lot of that out of Donald Trump. Remember, he was talking about pulling out of Syria, and then all of a sudden, the Duma false flag attack, and we're back in there throwing 1.5 million missiles all over the place. Over in Great Britain, as you know, this Sergei Skripal case has gone silent. A lot of people are saying there's been a D-notice issued. For those who don't understand what that is, in Great Britain, the press is not really free. In fact, right now, I think they rank 40th in press freedom. And the government has something called a D-notice, which is simply sent out to all the corporate media saying, you will not talk about this story. And the Skripal story just simply vanished. Nobody's able to talk to the Skripals. The Russian diplomats are very angry at Britain's refusal to allow them access to people who are essentially Russian citizens. But the propaganda was that Skripal and his daughter were poisoned by Novichok, and that because Novichok is only produced in Russia, it had to be Russia. Well, it's now come on out that the Czech Republic produces Novichok. Portendale produces Novichok. The U.S. produced Novichok. And so the whole story keeps falling apart, and I think that's why they're just trying to make it go away. You know, don't look at the Skripal case. Oh, look what's happening over in Iran. Now, one diplomat came on out and said the claim that was made that 50 to 100 grams of Novichok were painted all over the Skripal's front door doesn't pan out, because that much Novichok would have poisoned the entire neighborhood, not just the Skripals. So another piece of pro-war Russia-bashing propaganda falls apart. Interesting little story. It turns out India is the largest purchaser of Israel arms during 2017. And apparently Israel's military exports rose by 41% overall in 2017. And the largest distribution of sales, some 58%, was in Asia Pacific, with Israel's top 3 customers all originating from the region. Israel made a total of $9.2 billion in contracts. India bought $715 million worth of weapons, Vietnam $142 million worth of weapons, and Azerbaijan at $137 million. Sales of Israeli weapons to Europe still accounts for 21% of arms sale income. Now I have a question. We'll be right back. Aloha America, welcome back to the show. And again, a reminder, this promotional deal with Frontsight Firearms Academy has now been extended to June 2nd. And there will be no more extensions. Now, let's get back to the story I was talking about before the commercial break. Israel has a large domestic armaments industry, and in 2017, they sold $9.2 billion worth of weapons. They sell everywhere. They sell to India, Vietnam, all over Europe. And that raises an important question. If Israel makes their own weapons and they have so many weapons they can sell them all over the world, then why is the U.S. government sending U.S. taxpayer money to Israel for military aid? Just think about that for a minute. Israel has weapons. They make their own weapons. They have enough weapons where they can market them all over the world. Why do they need the American taxpayer to buy them more? Doesn't make any sense. Now, Donald Trump is pushing back on this story that came out in the New York Times that he was thinking about taking some of the troops out of South Korea. And he's now saying, no, he doesn't know where that came from. The New York Times has got egg on its face all over again. There's a lot of information that's coming out, being retracted, adjusted. There was that NBC story about the wiretapping of Michael Cohen. That's now been taken back. Speaking of Korea, the 3 American detainees who have been imprisoned for espionage in North Korea could be released across the border at any time now. In fact, it may have already happened. But it's another gesture of easing of relationship threat. Not really, because there's nothing around those islands in the South China Sea except water. They're only a threat to other countries trying to stick their nose into the South China Sea. And remember, at the end of World War II, there was a treaty signed called the Cairo Convention, which basically took all the lands conquered by Japan in World War II and returned them to their owners, including those islands which were returned to China. And this treaty was signed by all the major players, including the United States. These weapons that China are putting in are for defense. They want to be left alone. But the U.S. is ramping up the rhetoric, saying there will be consequences for this militarization of the South China Sea. This from the country that's been sailing warships all through the area for the last couple of months. Now, the U.S. isn't saying what the consequences are going to be. But again, all this tough talk is very, very alarming. Meanwhile, the U.S. is accusing China of attacking their pilots with laser beams in Djibouti, and of course, Beijing denies that. But supposedly, the U.S. lodged a formal complaint with China, alleging that the Chinese military injured 2 American airmen by directing high-powered lasers at their aircraft in Djibouti. So, all I can say is, knowing what I know about lasers, they must have some really wonderful aiming devices. Getting over to Palestine, the specific type of ammunition that is now being used by Israel against the Gaza protesters has been identified as a butterfly bullet. And if you go to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com, I included an image of what they look like. When I was a kid, they called them dum-dums. But it basically is this 3-lobed bullet that fans out on impact, and it's designed to just absolutely smash the body of everybody that it hits. And the Gaza medics are just saying the damage is incredible. And because Israel is not allowing the Gazans to go to better hospitals in the West Bank, they're basically having to amputate any limb destroyed by one of these bullets. And these bullets are the deadliest the Israeli army has ever used, and would constitute a war crime. Now, Israel has taken the position that human rights law doesn't apply to the Gaza protests because they're saying that this demonstration by the Palestinians along the Gaza fence is a state of war. And the state of Israel has every right to use whatever military force they deem appropriate to fight back. Now, that is a very ridiculous thing to say. These protests are peaceful. They're carrying flags and signs. They're not carrying guns. They're being sniped at by Israeli snipers from 100 meters away using these exploding bullets. It's not a state of war. It's a massacre. And it's just as one-sided and horrific as Britain's massacre at Amritsar. And I hope, like Amritsar, this massacre in Gaza signals the beginning of the end of Israeli domination over Palestine. Because it's gone on for way, way too long. And there are just too many hotheads in Israel who just say, it's ours because the Bible says it's ours. And that is a really, really ridiculous way to create a foreign policy. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha America, welcome back to the show. And again, a reminder, the Front Sight Academy deal has now been extended to June 2nd. It does not expire tomorrow. And again, go to the websites and take a look. It's a really good deal. We're going to take some phone calls now, and we're going to start with Nick in England. Aloha, Nick. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Mike. Thanks very much for taking my call. I just, you were talking about the Skripal case again just now, and I didn't realize that the governor had issued a D-notice to keep it all silent from the press.
It's been asked.
But, it makes sense.
Hang on. It's been asked if that's what happened.
Sorry.
Okay, we don't know for a fact that it happened, but a lot of people are saying it might have happened because the British corporate media, for the most part, just seems to have, let the story disappear.
Sure. Well, I've noticed that it's disappeared from the press, and it was very curious to me because, and we've talked about this before, but when you think about it, I mean, these two and the daughter, the daughter's got a cousin over in Russia who wanted to see her, and apparently she wasn't allowed to go and see her. And I think I read somewhere she had a boyfriend or a fiancé in Russia or something who also hadn't been allowed to see her. And you think that she's gone through, the most traumatic thing. She nearly died in a coma for goodness knows how many weeks. And, I mean, it just simply, doesn't make sense on any level. It is an idiotic story. And that's why the fact it's gone silent I found so curious. And I discussed with you in the past about the fact that Russians wouldn't bump them off if they wanted to do it that way. And just the idea, when you talked about the Novichok being put on the letterbox or on the door, I mean, the idea that they'd accept as collateral damage, the postman was almost certainly going to die, any delivery people were going to die, madness. The story is just insane from start to finish. So, and nobody is asking these questions in the British press at all. So I think it would make sense if it's been deliberately rubbed off the press. It seems like the logical explanation to me.
Yeah, it does make sense here. I mean, the media is very controlled by the government in both of our countries, and their job is to steer us from one lie to the next lie to the next lie, and when one lie collapses, oh, forget about that, we've got a new lie for you, and we'll polish up this lie a little bit better, and, oh, you don't believe that one? All right, well, we've got another lie over here that we're going to try and sell you. Low mileage, still under factory warranty, brand new lie.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, listening to you and hearing, I discovered through you things. For example, the evidence of the children in The Hague from Syria who had this so-called chemical bomb attack, this chemical attack on them. Now that that's all been shown to be a pack of lies. You would have thought if we had a free press that not only would that be reported on the front page, but it'd be on the front page of the newspapers with flashing red neon lights around it, that we rushed to war in a split second because we couldn't wait 5 more minutes because of the incredible threat that people of Syria were under. And it's all turned out to be a load of nonsense and clear breaches of international war crimes. And nobody's talking about it in the press. Nobody.
That's why the independent media is here. We're here to talk about the things the corporate media is trying to keep hidden. And obviously all of you technically are part of the independent media when you take what we share with you and you share it with other people.
Sure. Well, I know you keep a close eye on the U.S. press, and it wouldn't surprise you that sort of thing happens over there, but I just want to let you know that it's exactly the same over here. I'm sure you won't be surprised, but there it is.
Yeah, well, I remember... I was going to say, I remember 24 years ago when I stumbled into the Vince Foster affair. I was still living in the San Fernando Valley, And I'd worked at all 3 TV networks. I knew people there. And I had this information that the FBI had basically manufactured falsified testimony in the investigation. And I took it to my friends in the newsrooms, and they all said, we can't touch that. It's our job if we even mention that. And that was when I really began to understand that America's so-called free press isn't free at all. And it's rather ridiculous to see the White House Correspondents' Dinner out there patting themselves on the back for being a free press and being essential to democracy, when they're, in fact, they're the Ministry of Propaganda.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yes, we live in an inverted world, it seems to me.
Yes.
It's mad, yeah. Anyway, that was all I had for you tonight, Mike. Thanks very much, and talk to you soon.
All right, thanks very much. We're going to switch over to Nancy in California. Aloha, Nancy. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, there's so much on my mind. And as I sit here with what I called in about, and then I listened to your last conversation, so many other things were added to what I would love to say. But so I'm going to be brief, and I'm going to try to share a little bit of all of the thoughts, or some of the thoughts. Number one, I believe it's Zionists that have control of our country.
Yes.
And the media, the news outlets, etc. Number one. Number two, it's appalling to me that they can use religion to justify what they're doing over there to the Palestinians in grabbing this land and things, and yet they try to wipe religion out of our society. No Christmas trees, no, they're trying to purify our society to their liking. And then as far as the, I can't even remember everything I wanted to say, but I have recently come across some information about a man who was set up by the government and wrongfully incarcerated. His name is Schaefer Cox. Have you heard about him? I
think I remember the name, yes.
He was up there in Alaska and very eloquent. I would hope that we can generate some interest in his situation, and so that people can either send money to his legal team, do something to help this man. He sounds like you, Michael. They were establishing their own courts. They were doing things in a peaceful manner. He didn't call for any, violent revolution or anything. And he was set up, and he's a young man. He has a young family. He has kids. They've sentenced him for 26 years for nothing. Because we have a criminal government, and he was exposing it.
Yeah,
it makes me furious.
I'm looking at it right now. I'm going to post this on the next.
I have no respect. Thank you so much. I have absolute no respect for our government anymore. I think they're a bunch of thugs. I believe they killed James Traficant, or one of their thugs. One last thing. None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free.
True.
And that's where we're at.
Yes. Well, I think more and more people are waking up to the realization that this country is very different from what we were told in the state-controlled schools and on TV shows and movies, that our votes don't really matter anymore, that we are just considered livestock by the ruling elites, that our only job is to provide them wealth and new workers and new soldiers, and that they have no regard for us otherwise, which explains why so many dangerous, questionable products are being sold into the marketplace with hardly anybody giving any notice.
Yes, all their little FDA and all their little organizations that they've set up to so-called protect us actually really harm us.
Yes.
So they don't allow the free market to function. They protect the chosen that they decide to be protected, and come against people who have real remedies, like Stanislaw, I can't remember his name. Anyway, people who have had cures for cancer have been attacked.
Yes.
and put out of business, and sometimes fear of jail. It's criminal. We have a criminal government.
Yes, we do. We
It's
absolutely
very
do.
concerning.
Well, we're trying to do something about it.
Well, I appreciate everything you do. Yes, I so appreciate that, Michael.
All right. Well, thank you for the
Very
phone call.
much. Have a
And
good day.
we're going to let you go and switch over to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
It's not just our government. It's the whole Western world, Saudi Arabia, Israel. They're all corrupt because they're all on the same page. Mike, I just tuned in. I got late. What was the caller before her? Was he from Britain?
Yes.
He says we got an inversion. It's inverted totalitarianism. Britain, France, it's all the same group of people. It's an oligarchy.
Yes.
It's neoliberalism. You can smell it, see it, taste it. Man, Mike, Mike, did you hear Putin's putting together a new government? It's going to be a war. He's going to put a war government together, like a war cabinet, basically, because he knows what's coming.
Yeah,
It's scary now, Mike.
Scary.
And then Mike, I'm hearing people in Syria saying Alataki, there's a lot of flights coming in from Russian cargo planes.
I would not be surprised at all. And there's a lot of cargo planes flying in and out of here, and military cargo planes flying in and out of here.
They're not leaving, Mike.
No, they're not.
Russia's not leaving. They're not leaving. Iran's not leaving, Mike.
Yep.
I wanted to talk about Trump. Did you hear something like he was going to cut funding for the White Helmets?
Yes, we talked about that.
Oh, did you? Why all of a sudden, though?
Well, because the White Helmets failed. They failed to create a convincing false flag chemical attack in Duma, and Trump does not like failure. And he did his old apprentice thing and said, "You're fired."
But what about the British? Are they going to cut funding? Because 75 out of $100 million, 25 million only went to the White Helmets from the State Department through USAID. 75 million comes from the British government, and the head of the White Helmets, wasn't he a British intelligence agent who worked for MI5?
I think one of them is. The White Helmets doesn't seem to be a unified organization anymore. They've become somewhat factionalized. What Britain is going to do, I have no idea. But the White Helmets have been discredited. They are clearly not impartial. They're clearly not there to help all the Syrian people. They're a propaganda tool to be used against Assad. And I think Great Britain would probably, they should look at the optics of all of this and think about withdrawing their funding as well.
Mike, I thought we were in Israel as dirty tricksters, but Britain and France they've been around for a long time. You realize, they've been around for a long time. They're the kings of dirt. They put Israel there. They put Saudi Arabia there, right? As Saudi Arabia, not Arabia. So
yes.
they could be the king of the tricksters, right? Saudi Arabia, Britain and France at this point. They're dirty tricksters, Mike.
Yeah, they definitely are. But like so many other empires, their influence is waning. Now, obviously, France's interest in Syria is to go back to the golden days of colonialism. And we're seeing talk like that from a lot of the world power players. But I think most people in most countries don't want to go back to colonialism. Being a colonist in a colonial country isn't really a very good life. That's why the American colonists broke free from Great Britain. And I really don't want to see that happen. But you're right. France and Britain have been around for a long time. They've changed their form of government more than a few times, of course. But they retain the same cultural and historical identity. And yes, following World War I, they were very instrumental in drawing the map of the Middle East as it is today.
But they still have Mike, did you realize they still have those connections to the Middle East of today? You know what I mean? So they've been around for a long. They know where the roads are. You know what I mean? They know. Yes. You know what I mean? All roads lead to Britain now. Do you think, or France? Mike, they got French military in Manbij in Syria. There was pictures taken with American vehicles and French vehicles with American and French flags
Yes.
shown. And that's creeping me out because, you know, this is like empire, like what they did to India. And, you know, it's like the world's coming back around in a loop. You know, like it's like colonialism should be dead. You know, like what happened to the self-determination? You know, I mean, self-determination of people, Mike. Like,
well, that's what
you know,
the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights promises us all. But I think we're seeing countries go back to colonialism because they can't do business on trade. We have seen, this is true in Great Britain and France and the United States. They don't produce as much as they used to produce. And so the only way they can draw wealth from other countries is by colonizing them or controlling them or regime changing it or whatever you want to call it. But it's a very predatory form of international relations. And again, it leads to more war.
But it's a different world now, Mike. It's 2018. Like the technology has catching up. The U.S. is not technologically more advanced than China or Russia, believe it or not. I mean, everything is caught up.
Yes.
So it's a different world. These people are still living in the past. Hey, Mike, I just want to remind people, May 9th is the Russian Great Patriotic War celebration. They need to watch that and watch all the new Russian vehicles and watch the, you know, the old group of people who fought World War II that are still alive and stuff like that. You know, I mean, you know, we don't celebrate that here, Mike. Do you realize, like, we don't have those kind of celebrations that the Russians have because the Russians lost so many people. We don't. Nobody cares over here, Mike.
Well, that's
we're in the West.
That's because.
Mike, let me just say this. The British should. I'm sorry, Mike.
I was just going to say, the reason we don't hear about that here in the U.S. is we're supposed to be focused on the 6 million Jews. And there are no other victims in our media or our history other than the Jews. There are no other victims in World War II, not even our own Americans.
But if it wasn't for the Russians, Mike, the British would cease to exist. Do you realize if the Russians weren't there, Britain would be gone, France would be gone, Europe would be gone. If it wasn't for the Russians, and look at how they treated them, like dirt. Like dirt.
Yes.
You know, Russian aggression. What aggression, Mike? They could have been in France in 5 days if they wanted. We talked about that yesterday. There's nothing there. There's no aggression. But these people keep pushing that because these people are crap. You know? And these people are leading us off a cliff, Mike. You know? I mean,
okay.
I don't understand
well, Dustin, I got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and I need to get back to the news. So we're going to close the phone lines for a little while, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to get back to some news here for a little while. We may open the phone lines a little bit later. Getting on back to Israel and Palestine, the Council on International Relations, which is a Gaza-based non-governmental organization, has issued an invitation yesterday to New York Senator Chuck Schumer to come to Gaza so that he can see what the Palestinian people are having to go through and see that he and the Palestinian community share many attributes, from humble origins to a high value for education. And that is going to happen when pigs discover they are aerodynamic, because Schumer has had nothing to say about Israel's killings in Gaza, despite pressure from young Israeli progressives. Well, when he gets bought, he stays bought. Over at the Philadelphia Orchestra, they announced a visit to Israel, a concert tour in June of this year, and it sparked a tsunami of letters and protests by human rights advocates, and apparently subscribers and donors are withdrawing their support over this issue. People are getting fed up with Israel, and they're getting fed up with Israel's efforts to silence dissent on Israel, like happened in South Carolina. Somebody's got to get that law up to the Supreme Court and establish a precedent. The First Amendment allows us to criticize the actions of any government anywhere on earth. And trying to claim that criticism of Israel's government is anti-Semitism is as silly as claiming criticism of the Nazis is anti-Germanism. Hitler didn't do anything wrong. You just hate the German people. That's your problem. Now, it's not just the Palestinians who are suffering at the hands of Israel's escalations here. Israel is also, as one of the callers mentioned, they're also trying to erase Christianity. And apparently the settler groups are vandalizing and destroying church property. And Jerusalem City Council has all of a sudden declared that churches have been using their property for commercial purposes, and therefore they owe $200 million in back taxes, and if they don't pay it, Israel will seize their properties. So Theophilus III, who's the Greek Orthodox Patriarch of Jerusalem and the most senior Christian leader in the Holy Land, is trying to get worldwide support for maintaining the status quo in Jerusalem. Now remember, that status quo was established with the original United Nations partition plan, which said Jerusalem is a shared city. But Israel has never really listened to any kind of authority coming from the UN. So it's not just the Palestinians. They're at war on the Christians. And that caller was right. You'll see cities where there are going to be Hanukkah, the menorah, Stars of David, dreidels, and all of that. At the same time, they're attacking the placement of any Christian decorations on any land by saying, oh, it's a violation of the First Amendment. But if you make the same claim about their decorations, oh, you're being an anti-Semite. We've got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are closed for the moment. And again, a reminder, the promotional deal with Frontside Training Academy has been extended to June 2nd. So you still have time to take advantage of it. My understanding is a lot of people have taken advantage of this deal, which is good for them and obviously good for RBN. So obviously, thanks everybody who took advantage of this opportunity. Getting on back to Israel and Palestine, the Automobile Importers Association in the Gaza Strip said yesterday that Israel occupation authorities have stopped allowing cars into Gaza. It's just another form of punishment. And the association explained that about 88 vehicles were currently stationed at the Israel-controlled Erez crossing, waiting to enter Gaza ahead of the Jewish holidays. And they initially thought the cars were not ready to enter due to security checks, but after they made an inquiry to the Ministry of Transport and Communication, they were informed the entry was stopped. No reason is being given. We're just not going to let you import the cars anymore. Apparently, there's been another attack on a West Bank village. Settlers and soldiers working together attacked the village of Ainavas, and there's clearly an escalation going on. There's clearly an escalation going on, and we need to be very, very careful about that. It really is horrible to see all this stuff happening. And look at, unfortunately, I like to hold an image of the average human being being kind and decent and altruistic, but there is some kind of filtering mechanism where people who get into government are something very, very different indeed. And they're dangerous, and they've got nuclear weapons here. Meanwhile, talking about whether or not the U.S. is really ready to engage a military peer in a war, 10 enlisted U.S. Navy SEALs and a sailor who supported Navy Special Warfare are being administratively discharged from the service for testing positive for cocaine or methamphetamines. And the sailors assigned to the East Coast Naval Special Warfare Unit failed a series of regular drug screenings over March and April. And they're being let go now. The State Department is still on Turkey's case over Turkey's decision to buy the Russian S-400 air defense missile. And the State Department is out there throwing a tantrum saying, you're only supposed to buy NATO-compatible weapons. You're not allowed to go to those people. You have to buy our weapons. I'm sure what Turkey is saying, their weapons work better. They're cheaper. State Department is saying, you're going to have to buy our weapons or something bad is going to happen to you. Got a nice little country there. It'd be tragedy if something bad happened to it. It's amazing here. Now, getting to the domestic news, a couple of things that are breaking here. There's this federal judge, T.S. Ellis, and he just laid down the law on Robert Mueller's team. He accused them in court of lying and trying to target Trump. And he came on out and just said, you really don't care about Mr. Manafort. You really care about what information Mr. Manafort can give you to lead you to Mr. Trump and an impeachment or whatever. Now, the hearing where Manafort's team is fighting to dismiss this 18-count indictment on tax and bank fraud-related charges became very, very confrontational when the judge realized that much of the information in the indictment was from a separate Department of Justice investigation back in 2005 and was therefore outside the scope of Mueller's investigation. Ellis said that the information in the indictment did not arise out of the special counsel probe and is not within the scope of the investigation. He says we don't want anybody with unfettered power to just go wherever they want and do whatever they want. And basically at the end said there was no proof that there was any contact between Manafort and Russian officials, because during discovery, Manafort's lawyers had petitioned the government and said, we want, all relevant materials regarding conversations between Manafort and Russian officials. And the Department of Justice came back and said, we have no materials responsive to your request, meaning they don't have anything. It's not there. There's no evidence whatsoever. And Judge Ellis basically came on out and dropped hints he may just throw the indictment out of court. He was very angry. So, good news there. Now, as you know, Giuliani came out with a comment the other day that Trump had basically reimbursed his lawyer for a payment made to Stormy Daniels. And Trump said, no, that actually didn't happen. And so Giuliani, who should know better than to open his mouth without clearing it with the boss, because Trump is his boss, he's his client, that makes him the boss. And so what Giuliani said is, first, there is no campaign violation. The payment was made to resolve a personal and false allegation in order to protect the president's family. It would have been done in any event, whether he was a candidate or not. Second, my references to timing were not describing my understanding of the president's knowledge, but instead my understanding of these matters. In other words, he was sharing his own opinion. Third point, it is undisputed that the president's dismissal of former Director Comey, an inferior executive officer, was clearly within his Article II power. Recent revelations about the former Director Comey further confirm the wisdom of the president's decision, which was plainly in the best interest of the nation. Now, first of all, a couple of things going on here. We're going to pause and do a shout out to our on-air affiliates rejoining the network. First of all, I think whether or not the consensual sex happened between Trump and Stormy Daniels, and frankly, at this point, I don't give a darn, one way or the other. I'm sick and tired of hearing about it. But if money was paid, then we have to ask the question, did Stormy Daniels, a porn star, seek to extort Donald Trump? It's not like that sort of thing doesn't happen to people who are wealthy. It happens all the time. And we're not dealing with an accuser here with a high, shall we say, ethical benchmark, as it were. More importantly, the issue is that Giuliani is right. Trump has the right to fire anybody at any time under his Article II authority. But they're trying to say the reason that Trump fired Comey represents obstruction of justice. And that's what the anti-Trumpers are trying to dig at. They're trying to turn Comey's firing into grounds for an impeachment issue of obstruction of justice. But again, there can be no obstruction because nothing was found. They're trying to claim that Trump obstructed the Russia collusion investigation. But the investigation wasn't obstructed. It's still ongoing, all these months and many millions of dollars later, and they found nothing. I hope Judge Ellis does toss out the indictments against Manafort. That'll slam the brakes on this nonsense really, really quick. And I know I get a lot of emails from people saying, well, look, you said you're disappointed in Trump. Why not go after it? No, because this is supposed to be a nation of laws. Yes, Trump is a disappointment. I still prefer him better than Hillary, but he's been very, very disappointing. But as we hold faith to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, we must remain a nation of laws. And we must basically be good people. And that means not allow cheaters to prosper. Too many cheaters have prospered way too much as it is right now. Robert Mueller, of course, is now out there talking about a subpoena to the president to force him to testify in front of the grand jury. And Mueller's obvious intent is to basically trap the president into making any kind of a misstatement that can be turned into a perjury charge. Now, Trump's lawyers are probably going to fight this, and it should go all the way to the Supreme Court. But it is embarrassing to see how the entire machinery of government is out to get this one guy, because he's an outsider. That's their whole argument. He's an outsider. He's not one of us. He's not in the club. He's not Skull and Bones. He's not CIA. You, the American people, you were wrong to vote in an outsider, and we're going to get rid of your outsider just to show you that we can. Now, I imagine Obama is losing a little bit of sleep these nights. New documents have come out showing how he did collude with the FBI and CIA to take Donald Trump down. Now, this is all found in the newly released text messages between FBI officials Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, and it indicates there was coordination between high-ranking officials at the Obama White House, CIA, FBI, Justice Department, and former Senate Democratic leadership in the early phases of the investigation into alleged collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. And after all that, they still couldn't find anything. All they could come up with is a dodgy dossier that's been discredited and a fading porn star. That's all they've got. That's all they've got. I imagine it must be very frustrating for them. Pardon me. They're used to dealing with insiders who all have skeletons in their closets and under the carpets and in the trash can and in the backyard. And it must be frustrating for them that they haven't been able to find anything on Trump with which to manipulate him or remove him. Now, over at Judicial Watch, President Tom Fitton has issued a statement regarding the Department of Justice Inspector General's report released about fired FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe. Attorney General Jeff Sessions was wholly justified in firing former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe. The IG report released today portrays McCabe as a serial liar. When regular people lie to the FBI, they get slapped with felony charges. McCabe has yet to wear the handcuffs. Now, Judicial Watch uncovered documents months ago that should have triggered Mr. McCabe's removal. Americans should demand a full investigation of the numerous anti-Trump and other outrageous FBI abuses under Obama and McCabe's mentor, James Comey. And once again, the IG report showed the FBI had been covering up Andrew McCabe's text messages. There's already a court fight over those. It's all cover-ups and denial. Deny, 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 deny. Now, we had been told that Inspector General Michael Horowitz was going to testify next week before the House Oversight Committee. We are now getting word that will be postponed. Supposedly, the IG has found new leads in his review of the Hillary Clinton email investigation, according to a congressional letter and sources familiar with the matter. And Horowitz supposedly is saying it's of the utmost importance that the review be as fulsome. Oh, actually, this is Trey Gowdy. It is of the utmost importance that your review be as fulsome, complete, and unimpeded as possible. So I hope Horowitz is wearing his Kevlar undies here. Nancy Pelosi is under fire for a comment that she made about when the Democrats take the House this November, because with all those illegal immigrant voters, it's a shoo-in, that she's going to run for Speaker of the House again. And she explained the reason she wanted to do that was because you can't have just a bunch of white guys in the leadership position, which was immediately denounced as an incredibly racist and sexist comment. And it is, coming from a member of a party that claims to be anti-sexist and anti-racist. I think the Democrats are pretty much tired of Nancy Pelosi. So let's talk about the economic news now. A lot of stuff going on here. This is going to hit us all at the gas pump and the supermarket and a bunch of other places. Russia is cutting oil exports to Europe and ramping up trade with China. And China has been boosting their oil imports from Russia. And what this means, there's going to be a domino effect. Europe's going to have less oil and gas. They're going to buy more oil and gas from American producers. The shortage is going to drive up the price of oil, which is already going up over tensions regarding Trump pulling out of the Iran deal. So we'll see this at the gas pump. And anything that involves petroleum, which includes the supply chain to the supermarkets, you're going to see a price increase. Now, yesterday we mentioned a story that had aired briefly on Fox News about how Amazon had decided to end or halt this new Seattle office development, and it was over a tax. Well, we've got a few more details on this, and a lot of people may look at this and think that maybe Amazon has received enough of their money, because apparently the issue is that Seattle wants to impose a tax to help fund care for the homeless people, which sounds to me like a very humane thing to do. Amazon is saying that if Seattle wants them to continue the development of this new 17-story building, which will create 7,000 jobs, that tax to help the homeless be withdrawn. This is basically Amazon saying, let them eat cake. Oh, and by the way, that was a lie. Marie Antoinette never actually said that. That was just revolutionary propaganda. Kazakhstan is becoming a power player in the world gold market. They bought another 3.11 tons of physical gold. And every nation, they make another such deposit. And they're starting to be one of the major holders of gold in the world. Everybody's buying gold, if they're not trying to steal it from somebody else. Getting back on over to Tesla, they posted a record $710 million net loss as it struggles to produce the Model 3 cars. And I think that Tesla's CEO, based on that phone call, the conference call with investors, I think he's feeling the strain. But he gets a huge compensation package, billions. And his company is just falling apart. And it's a shame, because I do think electric cars are the way of the future. And I've had a chance to see the Teslas. Don't have the money to buy one, of course. But I'd be sorry to see that company go, just like I was sorry to see the DeLorean go. Now, somebody sent me a very interesting article about the critical reason why a cashless society is a bad idea, because it's the end of the Second Amendment. Because if every transaction goes through the bank, we're already seeing banks today start to refuse to do business with gun stores and gun manufacturers, which means the banks would have the power to basically prevent the American people from arming themselves. Because we wouldn't be able to take cash and go to a gun store. We would have to go to the gun store with our little plastic card. And then, of course, the bank would say, no, we don't do business with this store. And it occurred to me reading this, that applies to a lot of other areas. In a cashless society, the banks get to decide what you buy or do not buy. They could very easily steer you to companies they own stock in. They could shut out competitors. They could go on out and destroy small businesses to serve their big corporate masters. If you really think about it, the ramifications of allowing the banks to control where and when you spend your money, it's all bad. Bankers are not honorable people. Look at all the fraud we keep seeing in Deutsche Bank and Wells Fargo. They use this app, and the app Notifica will basically send out program messages to alert a pre-selected group of individuals with the press of one button. It's available on the Google and App stores. I see only one problem with that. When an illegal immigrant is being apprehended, he's going to start reaching his hand into his pocket and fumbling around. What are the cops going to think? Oh, he's got a gun. Boom. Well, I guess that's one way to solve the illegal immigrant problem. Over in Germantown, Sigmaringen, they've compiled statistics and discovered that 56.9, meaning almost 57% of the crime in that town is committed by asylum seekers. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we've had a new development now in this case where Judge T.S. Ellis has come down hard on the Mueller investigation. Basically, Mueller tried to justify his wide-ranging, just going anywhere he wanted, by saying that that was his mandate from Rod Rosenstein. And Judge Ellis is now demanding the full unredacted memo setting out what Mueller's mandate was supposed to be. Now we're seeing a breaking story over on 12160 saying that Mueller's investigation is actually considered a continuance of the 2016 FBI counterintelligence operation. And that's why Mueller didn't go through the special counsel process. They've been calling it a special counsel, but he isn't. So the judge is getting very, very angry, and I hope he just throws the whole mess out of court, because this has just gone on way too long. Okay, getting on back to immigration and Europe. Things are really heating up between Hungary under Viktor Orban and Brussels. Their focus of contention, of course, remains the open borders refugee issue. And Orban is now threatening to basically block the EU's budget as a way of getting Brussels to back down. And Hungary is one of the bloc's largest beneficiaries of so-called cohesion funds, which are designed to help bridge the gap between the continent's richer and poorer nations. In other words, they take money away from Great Britain and Germany, they give it to the other nations. However, the European Commission's new proposals for its post-2020 cohesion budget includes a series of conditions for eligibility, including basically agreeing with the values of the EU, meaning the open border. Okay. Now, Project Veritas is out at it again. And let's see. Okay. Over in New Jersey, Project Veritas has been out with their hidden cameras again. And the Union City Teachers Union chief is under fire after the release of an undercover video that shows her denigrating some of the city's public school students, suggesting a teacher not report he hurt a student, and referring to a Union City teacher who had sex with a child but was not charged criminally. So Project Veritas has been slammed by the statewide teachers union for using dishonest and illegal tactics to fabricate false stories. Well, the story isn't false. They've got the person on tape. Planned Parenthood said exactly the same thing. Oh, it's all fabricated. It's all edited specially. And Project Veritas is really getting at people because apparently AFT Michigan is now seeking to prevent the publication of Project Veritas videos. The truth is coming out, and people don't like that. Well, if you don't like the truth about your bad behavior coming on out, don't behave bad. There's another video that came on out. This one's gone viral, and it shows a Miami officer kicking a suspect in the head. And what makes this video so shocking is the suspect is already on the ground. He got down on the ground peacefully, was not presenting a threat. He's got another officer on top of him. He's already in handcuffs. And this Miami Police Department officer, Mario Figueroa, basically ran up to him and just gave him a leaping kick right into the head. ugly. Speaking of police, this is an interesting story, and it shows just how far down the road of corruption Mexico has gone. Apparently, prosecutors and soldiers raided the headquarters of a local police force in central Mexico and found a very surprising result. 113 of the 185 officers were fake. They weren't police at all, hadn't gone through the academy. They're all facing charges basically for impersonating an officer, and the state government is taking over policing duties for the town of San Martin, Texmelucan. Boy, how does that happen? Well, we know sometimes criminals like to pretend to be police officers. Makes their job a little bit easier here. Over in Great Britain, and this story illustrates why I'm so opposed to all this facial recognition technology. I mean, look at the problems they had with that face scanner on the iPhone 10. But apparently over in Great Britain, the facial recognition cameras being used by the British police are dangerously inaccurate and have so far marked thousands of innocent people as potential criminals. And this is happening in South Wales Police, London's Met, and Leicestershire. They're all testing out these automated facial recognition systems in public, and they're making more incorrect matches than correct ones. Experts are saying the technology could lead to false arrests and said it's dangerously inaccurate to use as a policing tool. And I would definitely agree. So, we're coming up here on another commercial break here, and when we come on back, a couple of stories related to the right to keep and bear arms. So stay tuned, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, over in Walhalla, South Carolina, there was an incident where a gentleman, and I use the word loosely, Ralph Goss, broke into a home. And he was very surprised to find out that this woman was still there. It was the middle of the day. He thought everybody was gone. And she was packing a gun. And the woman's name is Carrie Reeves. And she basically defended her home with a gun. And apparently she went on down and visited this guy in jail. He got arrested later and said, "You're lucky to be alive." Now, over in Texas, there was a man who basically was coming at this woman, Laura Williams, swinging a shovel at her. And like a good Texan, she had a gun. And she pulled it out and said, "If you take one more step, I will kill you." And the man ran. But again, Limestone County deputies later arrested him. The guy was Alan Tompkins, 47, charged with burglary of habitation. Additional charges may be possible. When this woman went to confront him, she said, "Next time you get the full clip." And it's just a reminder that as the CDC tried to conceal from all of you, guns are used to halt crime almost 4 times more often than they're used to commit crimes. Now, as you know, there have been these so-called student walkouts, anti-gunners. But a lot of students are now coming out and having counter-protests in support of the Second Amendment. And apparently in this one protest, they had 18 people show up to the anti-gun rally. 18. Wow, there's a public mandate here. And a group of local pro-Second Amendment kids wanted to counter the protest. And they were bullied and abused by the anti-gunners. One young man was pulled into a boys' restroom and was beaten up. A pair of girls were taunted as NRA whores and pushed and shoved and called little sluts. Well, who's the violent people? The gun owners or the anti-gunners? It seems to me that the violence is coming entirely from the side that wants us disarmed. They're using brown shirt tactics. Now, Tucker Carlson had a segment on his program responding to an op-ed written by Representative Eric Swalwell, who's a California Democrat, who came right on out and said, it's time to confiscate all weapons. And he said, assault weapons, without defining what that meant. And of course, Tucker Carlson came on out and said, this shows that all of these gun grabber claims that they were going to leave the law-abiding citizen alone were an absolute lie. And he had a guest on his show who was trying to basically explain away what Swalwell had written and say it's not really what we think. We're just after the common sense gun control. We want to keep guns out of the hands of the mentally ill and criminals. And then he made a slip and he came out and he said, you know, everybody agrees we have to get these weapons of war off the streets. Remember what I said the other day? The reason they're so obsessed about the sporting rifles are these are the weapons that would give the American people near parity with the U.S. armed forces, especially when you consider how outnumbered the armed forces are by the regular U.S. citizenry. And so that's really what the agenda is here. So hang on to your guns. In fact, buy more of them or build more of them. Now, an interesting development, we may be seeing the end of this cultural appropriation meme. And frankly, I'm getting sick of all this liberal bovine excrement. And it all goes back to this student, Kaonohi Daum, who wore a traditional Chinese cheongsam dress to her senior prom in Utah last month. And pictures went viral, and she was slammed as a closet racist and cultural appropriation. But the response that she was getting from Chinese audiences in social media is, they're fine with it. They think it's fine. They don't have a problem with it at all. Meanwhile, over at Gonzaga University, they've issued a memo to all of their students that any non-Mexicans celebrating Cinco de Mayo tomorrow are guilty of cultural misappropriation or cultural appropriation. So don't you dare put on that sombrero. Now, this is getting pretty ridiculous. How do the globalists expect us all to learn how to live with each other in peace if we don't have a chance to learn about each other? And as I said before, or rather yesterday, cultural appropriation, you can't get by without it. You know, the gasoline-powered automobile was invented in Germany by Carl Benz. So if I buy a car, am I guilty of cultural appropriation of Germans? It really doesn't make any sense. Cultural appropriation is necessary for human progress because each society adopts from other societies what it needs to grow and progress. This is just another one of these made-up crises for the liberals to scream and cry about and try and campaign on during elections. Yes, vote for us, and I'll make sure that you're never culturally appropriated. Who cares? It really is absurd. And let's take care of that. All right, we're good. Getting to the world of computers, apparently there are 8 new Spectre-class flaws about to be announced in the Intel CPU chips. Intel says it's readying fixes. Now remember, the last time this came on out, the fixes basically took away the high-speed advantage of the chips. You were getting less computer for more money. And they're saying it's a flaw, but look how many of them there are. Are these really flaws, or are these NSA and Israel backdoors? And if they are flaws, why is Israel selling a product before it's fully tested and evaluated to actually do what it's supposed to do? Because of the lack of product liability, our computer and software industry has just gotten into the habit of shoving products out there before they're really ready. Then they sit back and wait for the customers to complain. Then they'll issue the fixes. That way they don't have to pay the money for a quality testing staff. Windows 10, Windows 10's April update is making Chrome and Cortana freeze PCs. So if you have a Windows 10 machine, you may want to hold off on that one. We've reached a stage where Microsoft's updates cause more harm than good. And we had that article the other day where apparently a lot of the original functionality of Windows 10 is being deliberately removed in the new updates. They don't want to fix the problems that's in there. They're just saying, oh, we'll just take it away. We do need to bring back product liability, not just to computers and software, but to vaccines, to all these industries that have grown fabulously wealthy by being immune to civil litigation for the harm their products cause. Speaking of which, there's been a study over in Sweden that shows that since the introduction of the HPV vaccines, cervical cancer has increased. Now just think about that. We've seen that before. Vaccine comes out for a certain disease like measles or mumps. They vaccinate a bunch of people, and all of a sudden, they're all coming down with measles and mumps. Looks like it may have happened again. Since the introduction of the HPV vaccines, cervical cancer has increased. And it should be remembered, these vaccines are loaded with aluminum adjuvants. And aluminum is thought to be a contributor to Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative conditions. Now, Los Angeles has sued a group of pharmaceutical companies for fueling a rise in opioid addiction with deceptive marketing and sale tactics. And the lawsuit filed by Los Angeles City Attorney Mike Rivero in a California district court accuses the companies of borrowing from the tobacco industry's playbook to exaggerate the benefit of opioid use and downplay the risks. Well, good for Mike. It's all about the money. They don't care about the harm. They don't care about how difficult it can be for patients to get off these drugs. They don't want the patients to get off the drugs. There's very little difference anymore between these giant pharmaceutical companies and the guy down on the street corner with the little baggies. Article out of Natural News, right now in the United States, more than 1 million children under the age of 6 are on psychiatric drugs. And researchers, apparently this is not enough. Researchers at the Columbia University Medical Center came on out with a report claiming that not enough children are on psychiatric drugs. Remember Aldous Huxley's Brave New World? Everybody was mandated to be on drugs. Everybody was on this tranquilizer, Soma, that kept people from getting angry with the government. Now, do you remember last February, there was this gentleman, Aaron Trawick, CEO of a biotech company, referred to himself as a biohacker, and they were having a press conference, and he injected himself with his own company's experimental herpes vaccine, and he started to behave erratically right on the stage. That just something clearly went wrong. Unfortunately, he has now been found dead. He's 28. In a flotation therapy tank directly in the middle of Washington, D.C. So we don't know what's going on with that. Okay. So it's time to talk about human-caused global warming. Lee Canyon in Nevada just got a dusting of snow, and we are at May 4th. Over in Colorado, along Interstate 70, the western side, they're getting snow. They're saying it's winter driving conditions. Now, after a long delay and a lot of politicking and lobbying by Monsanto and so forth and so on, the U.S. Department of Agriculture is finally releasing the proposed regulations for the mandatory disclosure of foods produced using genetic engineering, which the USDA describes as bioengineered foods. And the regulations came out of a 2016 law signed by President Obama prohibiting existing state GE labeling laws, such as Vermont's, that required on-package GE labeling, and instead created a federal disclosure program, which for the first time creates a nationwide standard for required GE disclosure. There's going to be a 60-day public comment period where all public comments will probably be ignored. Basically, the gist of this is there will be no labeling on the product that says genetically engineered or bioengineered, but there will be a marker in the QR code They don't want you to see that stuff. They don't want you to stop buying products from the corporations. So they're going to put it in the QR code, which means you're going to need to have an app on your smartphone and access to broadband in order to scan your food and see if it's GMO or not. And this actually discriminates against about 100 million Americans who live out in the rural area where there still isn't a lot of over-the-air broadband yet. This is just another attempt to protect the corporations. It's like those package inserts in pharmaceutical products that are printed on very thin, very tiny paper in very microscopic type. Pharmaceutical companies are saying it's there to save shipping costs. No, it's to keep you from actually reading it. Apparently over at the FDA, some internal emails have been leaked, or rather uncovered by a Freedom of Information Act, that reveals another scandal. The FDA has known the toxic weed killer glyphosate has been contaminating the U.S. food supply. It's found in nearly all food. And the FDA ignored the threat posed to American consumers. Apparently, the finding of glyphosate in heavily consumed products like granola bars and corn is of no concern to the FDA. Supervisors have reportedly declared that the glyphosate present in those items doesn't count because they aren't part of the agency's official report, which is a roundabout way of saying we just decided not to include these because we don't feel that you need to know. We are living under fascism. That's the reality. We're not a free country anymore. We're not capitalist. We are fascist. Fascism, as first stated by Benito Mussolini, is when corporate power and government power is aligned together against the general population. If it was just one company selling a bad product that got away with it, you'd say, okay, something slipped through the crack. But when time after time you're seeing all of these toxic, dangerous products, glyphosate, vaccines, bad software, bad computers, being mass marketed to the public, making the owners of their companies billionaires, and the government does nothing, you know there's a problem. Minerals Management Service turned a blind eye to the fact that the blowout preventer on the Deepwater Horizon was 4 years overdue for maintenance. The Securities Exchange Commission turned a blind eye to Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme for 12 years. That's what's going on in this country. We've become fascist. Interesting little article coming out of Sputnik News. Apparently, there's a new satellite that just reached Mars. It's called the ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter. And it's there to detect and analyze the methane that is coming out of the planet. Now, that's what always evolves first. And of course, I attached to it my article on Viking, Life on Mars, and Dr. Gilbert Levin, because we actually answered this question all the way back in 1976. And it would be nice to see some vindication. Anyway, we're going to take another break for commercials. Back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're coming up on the lovely Lady Claire. Getting on back to the news here in Hawaii, Hawaii has become the first U.S. state to ban the toxic pesticide chlorpyrifos. Let me say that again, chlorpyrifos. And it's a highly dangerous restricted use pesticide widely used in industrial farming. And they're phasing out all chlorpyrifos, rented lips, uses by 2023. And it also brings robust pesticide reporting, especially of the more toxic pesticides. Now, Hawaii, thankfully, is very concerned about their environment, which is why they have been trying to keep GMO crops out of the island. And unfortunately, it's been an uphill battle, and there have been lawsuits that have been very contentious. But GMO is already here. There's a GMO papaya that's already being grown down on Maui, and the people on Maui don't like it one bit. More alarming, though, is this practice of test plots, where unapproved forms of GMO crops are being grown here in Hawaii. And I guess the thinking is if something really bad happens, it's just Hawaii. And let's see. Somebody was calling me from Switzerland. But again, it's very alarming because these are unapproved forms of GMO life. And we don't know what's in them yet and what harm they could cause. And again, it's the sign of just how fascist our country has gone. That they're allowed to play around with this, because in my view, genetic engineering is the most dangerous technology that humans have ever played with. Far more dangerous than nuclear power. They're tinkering with the code of life itself. And they're just taking it and they're putting together products and they're slapping a label on it and they're dumping it out into the marketplace without really being careful about what they're doing. And they still don't fully understand what's going on inside these genomes. They just look for a desired result, and when they get that, they go to market with the product. And what nobody is looking for is, because DNA is so self-referential, that's how so much information can be packed into such a tiny molecule, is because it refers back on itself so much. And when you alter the DNA in one part of the genome, it can trigger unexpected results in others. And the case I like to use, of course, is Roundup Ready corn, which produced the glyphosate resistance, but also produced corn stalks that were tougher than the natural variety, requiring farmers to buy Kevlar belted tires. So it's very alarming that this stuff is still out there. And there's the music. We're going to shift chairs around here and get the lovely Lady Claire in here for hour number 3, so stay tuned. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on YouTube, the gorgeous creature sitting next to me is the lovely Lady Claire, who joins us hour 3 every Friday with her unique perspective on the world. So what's the first thing you got to talk about?
Well, Deutsche Bank is shuttering its Houston office. Now, there was an internal memo that Bloomberg has seen on this, and as part of Deutsche's drastic restructuring, the purge began last week when Deutsche fired 300 U.S. bank-based investment bankers on Wednesday, with another 100 pink slips expected over the next 24 hours. What do they know that we don't, Mike?
Well, that's a very good
Why
question.
the timing? Yeah,
it may be that Deutsche Bank is pulling out of the U.S. ahead of a possible crash, or they may be afraid that yet another Deutsche Bank scandal is going to erupt, resulting in even more fines, or possibly something even bad enough to warrant prison time for some of their executives. But yes, it is a serious reduction of Deutsche Bank's presence in this country. Meanwhile, we're hearing that they're trying to expand in Asia, and that may indicate that Deutsche Bank realizes that the economic world is pivoting toward Asia, and the United States is a dying empire.
and they're just basically repositioning then, perhaps.
Yes.
Yeah. I'd like to talk about what's going on in Yemen, because apparently new massacres and assassinations have triggered a new phase of this war. In mid-April, some 20-plus of Sudanese soldiers were killed in an ambush in northern Yemen. Sudan sent up to 10,000 soldiers to Yemen in hope of Saudi money, and now is beginning to rethink. The Gulf states had also promised investments in Sudan and lifting of U.S. sanctions in exchange for sending cannon fodder. Neither has happened.
Well, Yemen's devolving into a mess, and now we have U.S. boots on the ground in Yemen as well. So,
yes.
It's just we're spiraling toward war everywhere.
Yeah. And the Houthi movement in Yemen is leading the fight. And Yemeni in general, this is a terrible characterization of anyone. They see them as monkeys with laptops. It's pretty disheartening. And to overcome the resistance, the Saudi launched a genocidal campaign of blockading, bombing, and starving the people of Yemen into submission. And the same week that the Sudanese mercenaries were killed, Airstrikes by Saudi jets slaughtered dozens of Yemeni civilians. They hit a wedding party in northern Yemen, killing 20 people, including the bride. And the images were just horrendous. And there was another raid on a house in Hajjah, killing an entire family of 5. On Saturday, at least 20 civilians were killed when coalition fighter jets bombed a bus carrying commuters in western Yemen near the city of Taiz, which has been locked in fighting for 3 years.
Well, what they're doing is they're carrying out a campaign of terror.
Mm-hmm.
And what Saudi Arabia is doing to the people of Yemen is little different from what Hitler was trying to do to the people of Great Britain. Mm-hmm. The only thing different is the weapons being used.
Yeah.
But the idea was to just carry out a war of terror on the people until they surrender. And I have to admit, I'm very impressed with the people of Yemen who are enduring all this abuse and refusing to back down. And I have that same respect for the people of Gaza who are enduring all of that horror and abuse and are refusing to back down.
Right. Good on both. Good on both. And the Standard Agency reports coming from Yemen are, like the above one, always repeat the UN estimate of more than 10,000 killed. But Mike, that number is at least 2 years old. And it never changes and only hides the ongoing massacre. And then to add insult to injury, apparently U.S. Special Forces have been sent to fight the Houthis in Yemen.
Yes.
We're much more committed there than officials in D.C. have ever admitted. And in fact, new evidence suggests that the Pentagon outright lied to Congress during the March debate about U.S. involvement, presenting the role as being limited to targeting and mid-air refueling of Saudi planes.
Oh, my goodness. The Pentagon lied.
Oh, my stars and garters, yeah.
The shock. How will I ever recover? Well, we know that the U.S. basically is using Saudi Arabia as a proxy to go into Yemen because there had been a so-called successful intervention in Yemen about 5 years ago where the U.S. kicked out the legitimate government and imposed a puppet ruler, and the people of Yemen didn't like being under puppet rule, so they kicked out the puppet, or they come close to kicking out the puppet. And so this is the U.S. using Saudi Arabia to go back in and say, you will love your U.S.-supplied junta and just try and slap them down to accept being ruled by a foreign government.
Yeah.
And the people of Yemen really don't want that.
No. And you know, what really kind of kills me, I think when you have that cosmic aha moment of your government not being what you had been led to believe that it was and what it represented. And I don't know about you, but I am very unhappy about being a citizen of a country with such a proclivity for committing war crimes with the Saudis. Unfortunately, both of us are a little bit too old and too broke to be considered seriously, even though we have longevity in our family trees and would be great contributors rather than a burden to any country which would accept us.
It's more broke than old.
Yeah,
problem.
And there are some civilized countries around which do not engage in war crimes.
Well, it's harder and harder to find those. The whole world is being dragged to a world war. And it's all about redrawing the map and resetting the global geopolitical system. And I am still very convinced that the U.S. is probably going to come out of this in less than stellar fashion. We're going to take a second here to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And we're seeing it all over. We're seeing what is being done to the people of Yemen, what was being done to the people of Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya. It's happening all over. The U.S. officially admits being involved in 7 wars, and there are probably a lot more of them. It was a complete shock to the American people to find out that we had soldiers in Niger who were being killed. So we don't really know where the U.S. is carrying out military operations. We have no way of knowing just how far this has gone. And sort of to underscore that, our partner across the sea, separated by a common language, the UK, has slipped to 40th place in press freedom rankings. Reporters Without Borders is saying that Britain is approaching a tipping point in wake of the passage of the Investigatory Powers Act. And apparently they are less free to hold power to account than those reporters in, get this, South Africa, Chile, or Lithuania, according to the Index of Press Freedom Around the World. Well, we had a call about that earlier today. We were talking about the way the Skripal case has just dropped off the British corporate media.
Yeah.
And people are asking if they were hit with the D notice, which is something that Britain has had for a very long time that simply says, you won't cover this story anymore.
Yeah, and in the past 5 years, the UK has slipped 12 places down the index. Rebecca Vincent, RSF's UK Bureau Director, said this year's ranking would have been worse if it had not been for a general decline in press freedom around the world, making journalists in Britain comparatively better off than those in countries like Turkey and Syria. And I'm looking at this, Mike, and I'm thinking, this is the country that gave the world the Magna Carta? This is absolutely unbelievable.
Well, look at the United States. We came up with the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. Is our government complying with them today? No.
And let's walk over to the world of technology. Apparently there is a dark side of computers, smartphones, and tablets. Blue light causes cancer, ruins your eyes, and makes you toss and turn at night. And the author of this article made the observation that he uses a computer and smartphone for more than 10 hours a day, so he was very unhappy to learn recent scientific studies which show that blue light emitted by our computers, tablets, and smartphones can cause cancer, ruin your eyes, and cause insomnia.
Well, that might be my problem.
Oh, yeah. And there are some things you can do to protect yourself. There are blue light filters you can use for your computer, tablet, or phone. And, for example, Amazon carries hundreds of them, apparently. And clear plastic filter that covers work computer monitor. And he just bought a replacement glass cover for his daughter's iPhone, which is also a blue light filter.
Now, are they talking blue or are they talking ultraviolet?
Blue.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because then why doesn't the blue sky have the same effect on us?
Because of the chemicals and the electricity in the items.
I don't know. This is feeling like Y2K bug to me.
Okay. All righty. Maybe. Let's move back over to China. And I know that you were talking about this a little bit earlier today. But China has been warned. There will be consequences for militarizing South China Sea. And I think this is sound and fury signifying nothing. Mike, what can the U.S. do at this point? I think it's nothing.
Well, they could use it as an excuse to invade and take the islands, which could lead to serious consequences. But those islands do belong to China.
Yeah.
From the Cairo Convention, they were China's before World War II. Japan took them away at the end of World War II. They were given back to China. They're little more than atolls. China has invested a huge amount of money building these islands up into something that's usable.
Yeah.
And now you have the U.S. coming on in and saying you can't do that. I think Vietnam wants to lay claim to the islands.
Yeah.
And now, of course, they've discovered there's a lot of undersea oil and gas there.
Right.
And that's the real motivation here.
Right, yeah. So what do you think the U.S. is actually going to do?
Bluff and bluster, but it's only going to take one hothead and one mistake to actually find ourselves in serious military conflict.
Yeah. Speaking of military conflict, there was a little incident by the Ministry of Defense in the UK, and they accidentally revealed that British drones, where they are engaged, are firing thermobaric missiles in Syria. Mike, aren't those illegal?
They should be. We did talk about this story earlier in the show and just how deadly these thermobaric bombs are because anybody who's in the vicinity of the explosion, they'll die from internal organ failure.
Right.
By the way, we're going to go ahead and open the phone lines if anybody wants to call on in.
They're called vacuum weapons, and they've been condemned by human rights organizations. And I love what the British did. The weapons are so controversial that Ministry of Defense weapons and legal experts spent 18 months debating whether British troops could use them without breaking international law. And the debate came to an end when a yes minister's solution was offered. They redefined the weapon as an enhanced blast missile.
Well, that's like redefining the H-bomb as a nuclear device.
Yeah. It's very strange out there with that. Now, we need to talk because it's something I would like to hope our listeners and viewers are talking about amongst themselves. And that is Netanyahu's performance demonstrated why the Iran nuclear deal needs to remain in place. And the disclosure by Netanyahu on Monday was not new stuff. It was old stuff, right?
Yes.
And they relate, yes.
Yeah, it was material that Iran had already surrendered to the IAEA, preparatory to the P5+1 agreement.
Mm-hmm.
And there's questions being raised that Israel just hacked into the IAEA computers and copied it all off to make their little dog and pony show.
Mm-hmm. What are you seeing, dear?
Large flight of helicopters,
Okay.
military helicopters going by.
All right.
They make a lot of noise.
We get that a lot out here.
Yes, we do.
Yeah. And apparently the White House has had some difficulty in adjusting its rhetoric to the historical nature of the disclosures, saying at first they were proof that Iran had a robust clandestine nuclear weapons program, but later changing has to had. And it's not the information itself, but I mean, this was published in the IAEA report on Iran in 2011.
This is all stuff that happened in 2003.
Yeah.
The IAEA knew about it. They knew it had been shut down. This is like when Tony Blair tried to build the case for war with Iraq with a 12-year-old outdated student thesis paper that he plagiarized. And now we have Benjamin Netanyahu doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
The information he presented on Monday is at the very least 15 years old.
Yeah. And I have some observations to share. When the gentlemen at the ladies and the ladies at the IAEA, with tremendous technical expertise, tell the world that Iran is completely in compliance with the JCPOA, I've got to tell you, I'm far more ready to believe them than believe Netanyahu, who may be moved by an upcoming corruption indictment trial to start the war against Iran even more quickly than 12 May, to distract the Israeli people from what is going on, and attempt to get a war going against Iran before the American people understand that yet again, they have been duped into a war cheerled by a foreign leader who is expecting this war to be primarily fought at the cost of only American blood and American money. Now, he may have been able to dupe President Trump into such an action, but the American people understand clearly, just as Saddam Hussein actually had no weapons of mass destruction, as both President Bush and Colin Powell asserted, and this was primarily for control of the oil and in which denomination it was going to be sold. And Mike, to my eye, what's going on with Iran is the same thing, to control its oil and the currency in which it will be sold.
That's absolutely it. And also, of course, to smash up a regional rival to Israel, which was another motive for Iraq.
Yeah.
And Netanyahu may have decided to come out with this nonsensical report about Iran, also to try and distract the world away from what Israel is doing to Gaza right now.
Yeah.
And especially for them to come on out and say that a peaceful protest by the Gazans represents a state of war, thereby allowing Israel to ignore humanitarian international law.
That's insane.
And use exploding bullets.
That's insane. It's completely insane.
The optics are really terrible.
Yeah, yeah. And I am hoping against hope that President Trump will not decertify but continue to certify. Although right now, as we get closer to that decision day, which is a week from tomorrow, the 12th, I'm getting less and less feeling of comfort that he will continue with the agreement.
No, I don't think he will. We're hearing it from numerous White House sources. We know polls are showing that the American people, the majority, 67% I think it was, want him to keep that deal in place.
Yeah.
Certainly all of the other signers of the P5+1 deal want Trump to keep it in place.
Oh, yeah.
But Trump is listening to his very hawkish advisors like John Bolton, and he's certainly getting an earful from Benjamin Netanyahu.
Oh, yeah.
To withdraw from the deal and let it collapse and thereby open the door for some kind of an attack on Iran. Now, this, of course, is going to really upset the world oil markets, which means you'll not only be paying for this next war with your taxes and your children, but also at the gas pump
Yep.
and the supermarket.
Yep.
Because the poor are made to pay for all.
The implications are really staggeringly bad.
Yes, they are.
And how do you think a U.S., possibly Israeli-Saudi war against Iran would start?
They're not going to be able to sell it absent a real nasty false flag attack.
Yeah.
The American people are sick and tired of war. We've been at war for 18 years. We've watched our children come back from the war zones in wheelchairs and sheet metal boxes.
Right.
We're seeing our country neglected and just decaying into rotted ruin because all of the wealth produced by the labor of the American people feeds that war machine. And the war has already gone on too long. If you remember Wesley Clark, he said this was all supposed to be over 2008, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And so it's gone on 10 years longer than expected. It's certainly much more expensive than expected. And I do wish they would turn around and go back, but they can't do that without the U.S. economy imploding immediately. So it's, yeah, they'll find out some way to justify it. They'll come out with another dog and pony show, or they'll set off a nuclear bomb someplace and say Iran did it, even though it makes absolutely no sense for Iran to do something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Just like it made no sense for Assad to drop chemical weapons on children in in Duma. It really is. It's utter nonsense. But the war hawks, they want war, and they're going to do whatever they think it takes for them to get it.
Well, what do you think they're thinking about doing, and how much sooner do you think Netanyahu is thinking about starting this, looking at the corruption trial?
Well, we're going to have to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and it's just now on Fox News where Trump has come on out and said there are no plans to reduce the number of U.S. troops in South Korea. So either the New York Slimes made it up, or Trump really did want to reduce the troops like he said he wanted to do in Syria, and he's had his collar yanked good and hard by somebody. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a phone call now. Francis in North Carolina. Aloha, Francis. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, aloha to you both.
Aloha Snack Bar.
There you go. Night bar and all.
Okay.
Hugs to you, Claire.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I get to talk to you finally instead of him, so hey, go figure.
Stay safe from the volcano.
Oh, will you stop that?
Oh, that's a little sensitive of a subject right now.
Well, we're on a different island, fortunately, but if they have a big quake like above magnitude 6 down there, we'll definitely get shaken, not stirred up here.
Well, that's true, too. You have to excuse the other half. That was him shooting off his mouth when it was inappropriate, too. Anyway.
We forgive him.
Yes, all is forgiven. So what's on your mind?
Yeah. Well, anyway, you mentioned or alluded to the aspects regarding a film of sorts or screen for the electronic toys and so forth to help reduce the amount of
blue light.
Yeah. Yes. And I have to agree with that aspect because I know myself I have a yellow-colored film that is on the screen of the laptop that I use, and believe me, it actually dampens it down a lot. It actually makes it softer on your visual. You're looking at the screen where your eyes are not so abraded by it. So I have to applaud you to research on that deal.
Well, I want to do a little research on it, and for two reasons. First of all, on most of these devices, you can actually tamp down the blue channel using the graphics display controller. You shouldn't need a piece of plastic. And I remember a while back when everybody was putting these little tiny adhesive discs on the back of their cell phone because it was claimed that these discs would prevent the waves from the cell phone from harming your brain. And of course, that just turned out to be this huge hoax, and a lot of people made money off of it. So I really want to look into this because this, to me, coming from a science background, it isn't really passing the smell test. And like I said, if blue light is all that bad for you, then what about people who spend a lot of time outdoors under a blue sky?
That's a good point. Although I have to admit one thing, though, even though you may play with the frequency control as far as the light projection is concerned on the screen, that's good. Try that. I have to applaud you on that. However, since we do not create these laptop electronic toys, what has been set by the manufacturer was probably a lot higher than what we're thinking we can actually try to adjust on our own to something that's a lot more comfortable, although I have to applaud you on that deal. I find that making my own manual adjustments to be a lot more helpful because at least I have control over that and not the manufacturer.
Right.
As for the thing about cell phone, I have to applaud you on that because, I'm sorry, I've seen where people do that, but why is it always put on the outside, which is on the opposite side of the electronic toy that you're putting up against your head to start with? That makes absolutely no sense to me at all.
Yeah, that's exactly the point, but people don't want to cover the screen. Now, the issue about electromagnetic radiation harming you, it's still not fully explored. Every once in a while, somebody likes to get on out there and shout fire in a crowded movie theater about one such aspect or not. So far, there have actually been no scientifically rigorous studies that have shown a link between cell phone radiation and an increase in brain cancer. All the evidence is purely anecdotal. Now, I think living in a constant swarm of electromagnetic radiation from everything, from the cell phone, from the tablet, from police radio, from AM and FM radio, citizens band, ham radio, radars, of which we have a lot here in Hawaii, cumulatively there may be an effect. But there's something else you need to remember, and that is that the modern flat panel displays that are used on all of our toys these days are certainly a lot safer than the old cathode ray tubes that were on home computers way back in the day. Those really did put out radiation that was potentially harmful, including X-rays. And there were shielded monitors you could buy, but they were a lot more expensive.
That would make sense. However, if I can throw this in on top of it all, for that matter, believe it or not, it's going to sound rather like woo-woo or like, yeah, right, Twilight Zone deal. But I have discovered that whenever when we get ready to retire for the day, I will literally turn off the Wi-Fi at the household at the source of the switch or whatever it is, because we have a switch that extends out from the wall or whatever, so we can just simply snap on or snap off or whatever. And believe it or not, I have discovered that the household becomes quiet. It does not. I don't.
Okay, I got to let you go. I got to let you go. We got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we just got an email basically giving us an insight into what is going on, because according to this author, the problems with things like insomnia are triggered when you're exposed to blue light at nighttime. And this actually ties in with that analogy I was saying, what happens, to people who are out there under the open blue sky. And this actually makes a lot of sense. Apparently, when you're under blue light, whether it's sky or artificial, it prevents the release of melatonin. And the melatonin, of course, is what helps you sleep at night. So if you're exposed to blue light when you're going to bed or at night, that will in turn cause sleeplessness and insomnia. And of course, lack of sleep can in turn trigger other medical consequences. That actually does make sense. And again, anecdotally, I get up very early in the morning to get to work on the website. And usually I'll get up and I'll feel like I want to go back to bed. It isn't until the sun comes up that I feel like I start to wake up, because that's how we evolved. When the sky is blue, we're up and active, we're hunting mammoth. When the sky is dark, we're asleep in our caves, making sure that the saber-toothed tigers aren't hunting us. All right, we've got two more callers on the line here. Let's go to James in Ohio. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. I had some information about the blue light thing. There's a protein called cryptochrome that exists in the human nervous system, and it's very similar to the chemicals called opsins in the retina that allow us to see colors. A cryptochrome reacts to blue light and magnetic fields, and in animals, it allows animals that migrate or navigate by virtue of the Earth's magnetic field, to find their way.
Yes.
In addition, I used to invent, produce, and sell what they call mind machines, which stimulate specific brain parts. One of these was a headset, and it had a small electromagnet, and one version had a blue LED that went over one eye, and a complex audio signal was played through both. And according to my experience and my customers, the addition of the blue light caused a drastic increase in the potency of the effects.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't surprise me at all if the electromagnetic radiation emitted by computers and cell phones also affected cryptochrome. In addition, Mensa has special interest groups, and on Yahoo there's a special interest group, and among the members are two scientists who did the initial tests on the effects of cell phone radiation before they were marketed, and they were furious that they were released into the market without more extensive testing.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I have for you, but I figured it was relevant.
Well, thank
All right.
you.
Well, thank you very much for the information. We're going to let you go and switch over to Glenn in California. Aloha, Glenn. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael and Claire.
Aloha, Glenn.
I just wanted you both, the email and the last caller stole some of my thunder. It does absolutely have to do with the day-night cycle, and that does make scientific sense. But I wanted to share something with you and your listeners. There is an app available for all devices that I'm aware of. I think you have to have a jailbroken iPhone to get it, but It's called F.LUX, Flux, with a dot after the F. And it's an open source free app, and what it does is, based on your time zone, as the sun sets, it gradually changes the lighting on your devices so that it tends more toward the red, and helps your biochemistry that way. And there's also a lot of information about the science behind it on their site. So I just thought that'd be a good place to point your readers, because it really does make a difference.
Well, thank you.
If this is such a controlling factor in this, and it makes sense that it is, this is actually going to pose a problem for the first manned missions to Mars, because the sky there is the inverse of here on Earth. Here on Earth, the daytime sky is blue, and the sunsets and sunrises are red. On Mars, the daytime sky is red, and the sunrises and sunsets are blue. And so that may actually be a factor in crew alertness.
Another reason you need to be the head of NASA.
We agree with you 1,000%.
I think I was turned down because of that comment I made about ordering all the ground crews to dress up like apes every time a spacecraft returned to Earth.
I think that would be your biggest selling point, but whatever.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay,
You two have a lovely, lovely day, and stay safe.
We
certainly will
Thank
here.
you.
We certainly will. Okay, Glenn, we're going to let you go. Thank you for the call. Your next story, Claire.
Okay. This comes to us from Global Research, a very sober and very fact-filled website and blog. It's Canadian. And they had a huge picture at the top of this article, The Art of War, U.S. fleet with 1,000 missiles in the Mediterranean. And apparently the U.S. aircraft carrier Harry S. Truman, which set sail from Norfolk, Virginia, entered the Mediterranean with its strike group. And the strike group consists of guided missile cruiser USS Normandy, the guided missile destroyers USS Farragut, USS Forrest Sherman, USS Bulkley, and USS Arleigh Burke. Two others, USS Jason Dunham and USS The Sullivans, will rejoin the strike group at a later date. And also, the German destroyer FGS Hessen is added to the Truman strike group. Now, this fleet has more than 8,000 guys on board, has an enormous firepower, the Truman, which is a supercarrier, 300 meters long, equipped with 2 nuclear reactors, can launch 90 fighters and helicopters in consecutive waves. Its strike group, supplemented by 4 destroyers already in the Mediterranean, can launch over 1,000 cruise missiles.
Well, I noticed they mentioned the other destroyers and some submarines, and that has to include that SSGN, which is the arsenal ship that has something like 190 Tomahawks in it.
And it is said that the reason for strengthening the forces in Europe is accusing...
To counter Russian aggression.
What Russian aggression? Mike, it's made up. There's nothing there.
You know, I look out the window here at Pearl Harbor and everything. I don't see any Russian warships, steaming around here, making threatening moves.
But why now and why here?
Because if they are going to escalate in Syria, I think everybody understands there's going to come a point where we're going to get into direct conflict with the Russians. And I think it was about a week ago where somebody said the doctrine being discussed in the Pentagon is to get into a conflict with Russia and hit them so hard in Syria that they'll basically back down and mind their own business.
I think that's a very dangerous way for the military to be thinking in this country. It is a very
dangerous way.
Whoa.
But it looks to me like that's why they're amassing that much firepower. Of course, if you look at the success rate of our missiles, they may have 1,000 missiles there.
Yeah.
They've got 200 they can expect to actually hit what they're aimed at.
That's a terrible ratio, Mike.
It is a terrible ratio.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah, and looking at the Middle East also, the Israeli defense chief is telling Russian daily, if air defense systems fire on us, we will respond if they're going to be hitting Syria. I mean, I read that and my jaw dropped.
Well, they've been saying that all week. They're saying, first they said it to the Syrians.
Yeah.
If the Syrian air defense systems shoot at Israeli planes, we'll destroy the Syrian air defense launching points, which is going to be a trick because they're obviously by default very well defended.
Yeah.
Then they extended the same threat to Russia.
Yeah.
And they started out demanding Russia stand down, then threatening them. Now they're trying the charm offensive and saying, remember, we didn't join in the Western sanctions against Russia. You owe us, and you can repay us by being pro-Israel in Syria and Iran. None of this, of course, is going to work on Putin.
No, definitely not.
He's too much of a chess master. He knows what's coming, and he's getting ready to do it.
Yeah. And apparently, from the perspective of the Israeli government, national hubris has utterly no limitations.
Well, we saw that with that story about how the protesters in Gaza are in a state of war, and therefore Israel doesn't have to comply with the war crimes laws.
Protesting peacefully? My gosh, come on.
Oh, he's got a flag. Shoot him.
Yeah.
He's a threat.
Yeah, it's making no sense, and the optics are terrible, and Tel Aviv just doesn't seem to get it. Not at all. And here is a story which is not being covered at all in Western media. We've got race riots going in South Africa against South African farmers.
Yes. And if this whole whites are evil thing gets going here in the United States, we'll see the same thing here.
Yeah. And right now they've got about 30,000 farmers, and there were 11 farm attacks and 3 farm murders very recently. And it's chaos. And it's a fact that they have seen looting, burning, destruction, and chaos during the riots in the Northwest province. And there was a video linked to the top of the article which brings to light the situation as it is, and no denying by the ANC government is going to change this. It's really horrific.
Well, it's not unexpected. Zimbabwe went through the same thing. When they grabbed all, the farmers' land and they redistributed it to the black people, and the black people didn't know how to run a farm.
Yeah.
They'd been working on the farms in certain chores and tasks.
Yeah.
They didn't know how to run a farm because it's actually a lot more difficult than you might imagine.
Yeah.
From the popular cultural image of a farmer just sitting there and listening to the crops grow. There is a little bit more to it than that. I know, I was a farm kid.
Yeah. And you have the ANC South African president stating incontrovertibly that black South Africans are going to take farms from white owners, whether they like it or not. And I would like to strongly caution this gentleman about what happened in Zimbabwe, because when it was Rhodesia, it was the breadbasket of Africa.
Yes, it was.
And when that changed and land became, what is a kind way to say this? It became seizable by the government to break up and to share. Everything went south.
That's right.
Yeah.
And their food production collapsed, and that's inflation soared, and that's why they wound up with $100 trillion banknotes in their pockets.
Yeah, yeah, it was pretty awful. And now the ANC members of legislature are trying to blame the farmers for all the ruling party's shortcomings. And the ANC, unfortunately, has been in power far too long and has gotten far too corrupt. My understanding is that the party has gotten into bed, if you will, with the large multinationals which mine there because it's a great resource for mining.
Yes.
But the problem is the average African in South Africa is not doing any better with labor, with wages, with the schools his kids go to, and that the situation for the ordinary South African person hasn't improved barely a bit.
We're seeing the same thing here. Yeah. All the wealth goes to the people at the very, very top. All the work and debt goes to the people at the very, very bottom.
Yeah, yeah. It's really, really kind of scary. And you have to wonder when something like that may start to happen here.
Well, again, this idea that white people are automatically evil, it seems to be dying out. It didn't get a lot of traction, but it's still alarming that this idea was being sold here.
Yeah.
And somebody actually wrote in and suggested that the goal of the U.S. government may be now to get rid of the troublesome white Americans who think way too much and just replace them with these blindly obedient people from the third world. Okay, we're going to take another phone call here. Mark in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, how you guys doing?
Doing well.
I just wanted to say that, with that big fleet and everything like that, with a fancy ship, that they'd be like ducks in the water. I mean, sitting ducks. I mean, that's old stuff. Everything I understand, I go online and check a lot of the stuff out about Russia and all that, what they have. They have stuff today that I don't even think we have, that we even know existed.
Yeah.
They could destroy that probably in about a half an hour, from everything I understand. With all their, it's just, big tonnage and stuff like that. It might scare a third world country, but it's not going to scare Russia.
No, definitely not.
Like I said, what happens if they sink that fleet? What will we do next? That's the thing. That's the dangerous. I mean, I hate to see all those troops.
That's when the nuclear weapons will fly.
What I'm worried about. That's exactly what I'm worried about. Do you think we can control ourselves and say, okay, let's just forget this and stop this nonsense, or you think it would really go to the nukes?
I'm sure the message is already being sent to Russia. If you attack that carrier, we will respond with nuclear weapons.
Yeah, but they have the nukes too. I mean, don't they realize that? I mean, they're not dealing with Iraq this time.
No,
they're dealing with the other superpower.
Yeah.
Huh?
I hear you. I hear you.
I mean, what kind of madmen are governing us these days,
Very mad.
Yeah, so criminal sociopaths.
Yeah.
And it seems like every 50 to 100 years, the world has to fall under the sway of these kind of people, and the world learns an ugly lesson about listening to such people, and then we promptly forget it and get suckered into the same thing over and over and over again.
It's sort of...
It makes me wonder. I'm sorry. It makes me wonder. Maybe David Icke is right.
In what?
What I'm saying, right? In the
context.
The reptilian stuff.
Oh no, I don't think so.
No,
I don't think. Don't get me wrong. I accept as inevitable that the universe is filled with all kinds of intelligent civilizations. I just can't think of a reason why they'd be interested in us.
No, because our major occupation is still tribal warfare.
Well, no, it's simpler than that. Civilizations evolve with their technology. Do we stop at every anthill we drive past
Never.
in our nice new car?
Nope.
no, same thing. Any starships that are out there, they're going to whiz by Earth and not give us a second look. We're just not that interesting.
Yeah, well, maybe at some point in the past, they looked at the Earth and they said, we can get something out of this, and on top of that, we can rule these barbarians, savages.
What do we have that they would want? What do we have that can't be gotten far more easily out there in space? We're of no value to an advanced extraterrestrial civilization. Anyway, Mark, I got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. The phone lines are closed because this is the last segment of our program today, and Claire and I are just wrapping up. And Claire, you've got a very important story here.
Yes, coming out of global research, the U.S. is stressing interventionist plan in Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela.
We saw that one coming.
Yes.
They set up the Petro.
Yes, and
started offering to sell their oil to China at a 30% discount.
Yeah.
Yep.
And Vice President Pence said that he was working for freedom in Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, and it's a top priority of Donald Trump's administration. During a ceremony in which the new U.S. ambassador to the Organization of American States, OAS, Carlos Trujillo, was sworn in. And he said, "We will stay by the side of those who long for freedom, and we will confront their oppressors."
And how many times have we heard that one before?
Oh.
In every military intervention by the United States since the end of World War II, it always starts with, these people are oppressed, they love freedom, we must bring them democracy. And then we go on in and we wreck the country and we leave them under the control of a U.S.-backed dictator. Not once have we ever actually brought these people true democracy. And so here we are again. They can't even deal with the mess they've already made in the Middle East. And now they're talking about Nicaragua and Cuba. And I told you they were going to find a reason to go into Venezuela.
Oh, yeah.
Because Venezuela has a bad habit of selling their oil for currencies other than the U.S. dollar.
And one of the largest proven reserves in the world,
Absolutely.
right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
And he was turning on Daniel Ortega. He attacked the Venezuelan government, calling President Nicolas Maduro a dictator, and charged him with turning one of South America's most prosperous countries into one of the poorest. Well,
ignoring decades of U.S. economic warfare
and
against
sanctions,
Venezuela.
And sanctions. I mean, for heaven's sakes, Michael, we are trading with Vietnam these days. Why the Sam Hill can we not also trade with Cuba?
Well, Obama tried to get that going.
Yeah.
And it would have been wise and prudent to develop good relations with Cuba so that Cuba does not become a Russian resource in the event of the outbreak of the World War.
That's
it was very short-sighted to go on back and say we're going to make stink face at Cuba and cut them off. And I'm not just saying that because I wanted some Cuban rum and Cuban cigars. It's a strategically bad move for them to make.
Yes.
But I think that was driven mostly by the CIA, which knows how to keep a grudge, and they still see Cuba as having broken free of their control at the Bay of Pigs. And they don't want to be friends with Cuba. They want Cuba to be their slave again. And I think that's what's driving the issue in Cuba. And it was foolish to do.
Yeah.
I mean, the only reason that Fidel Castro formed an alliance with the Soviet Union was because the U.S. refused to normalize relations following the downfall of Batista.
Right.
And the U.S. refused to normalize relations because Cuba refused to give the same steep discounts to Cuban agricultural produce to companies like PepsiCo and United Fruit. And their deal was, you will give us the same special treatment your predecessor did, or we're not friends.
Yeah.
And so Castro said, we're not friends. I got to take care of the Cuban people. And that was when he became part of the Soviet sphere of influence.
Yeah.
And that's when everybody went crazy.
Oh, yes. I remember that. Cuban Missile Crisis?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Bay of Pigs. The whole...
Yes. Yeah. It was terrible. We need, on a national level, our country needs to choose its friends and allies more wisely.
Well,
very much so.
We need to treat our allies and friends a little bit better along with that. Okay, there's the music. Time for us to get out. Have a good weekend, a careful weekend. Watch out for false flags. And for those of you living in Hawaii, watch out for volcanoes.
Yes.
Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got a lot of stuff to share with you. Please take what you learned here and at the website and share it with everybody you know. You are all now deputized part of the independent media. You need to talk to people. You need to email them. Don't use social media. It's
Yeah.
heavily filtered and censored.
Yeah.
We'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.